Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of The Digital Download, the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now globally syndicated on TuneIn Radio through IBGR, the world's #1 business talk, news, and strategy radio network. Today, we're discussing why your trash can be your greatest asset. We have a special guest, Kathy Nesbitt, to help us with the discussion. Kathy's passion for the environment and her extensive experience in vermiculture provide a fresh perspective on waste management. But before we bring Kathy on, let's go around and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, so audience participation is highly encouraged. All right, with that, introductions. Tim, would you kick us off, please?
Yes, welcome everybody. My name's Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm famous for writing the book Social Selling: Techniques to Influence Buyers and Changemakers.
Excellent, thank you very much. Bertrand, welcome.
Yes. Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Bertrand Godillot. I am the founder and managing partner of Odysseus & Co. And we focus on helping customers enable a very productive social presence. And I'm a very proud DLA Ignite partner.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And myself, I am Rob Durant. I am the founder of Flywheel Results. We help businesses scale their sales through hypergrowth. And I, too, am a very proud DLA Ignite partner. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Kathy Nesbitt, owner of Kathy's Crawley Composters. She has spent over 2 decades advocating for sustainable waste management. Her unique insights and hands-on experience make her a leading voice in promoting environmental sustainability. Let's bring her on. Kathy, good morning and welcome.
Hi,
Thank
Kathy.
you. Good morning.
Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited.
Oh, we're excited too. This is going to be a fun one. Kathy, let's start by having you tell us a little bit more about you, your background, and what led you to where you are today.
Thank you. So my working title is Kathy Crawley Laughing Bean Queen. It doesn't fit on a business card. I offer simple solutions for today's challenges: worms for amending the soil, sprouts for eating, grow your own, and laughter for overall health and wellness. The worm business, it's the 22nd anniversary of Kathy's Crawley Composters. I'm located just north of Toronto in Canada. And in 2002, our landfill closed and we started to export our garbage to the United States. Almost 1,000 trucks a week were making the trip from the Toronto area to Michigan.
Sorry, Rob.
That's what I usually, sorry, how Canadian.
You said Michigan, you didn't mean Washington, D.C.?
That's right, Michigan. Yes, the trash capital, Michigan is. Without getting into too much politics about what happened, I think Michigan was the automotive capital, and Ford, GM, Chrysler had their headquarters there, and then everyone started to make cars. We make cars in Ontario now. So Michigan needed a new industry, and I don't know, I guess they just thought maybe we'll be the trash capital. So they have the lowest tipping fees for landfill, and surrounding states send their trash to Michigan as well. But the Canadian trash is what causes the most trouble. But that's finished now. We found a spot in Canada. Thank goodness we're second largest country. So I had a solution. That's, and I laugh a lot because this is a really heavy mission. Managing our waste is one of the easiest things we can do to help mitigate climate change. This is indoor composting with worms. It's the same idea as outdoor composting, except done inside. So that's my beginning.
Thank you for that. So, Kathy, let's start with a foundational question for today's discussion. Why do you consider trash an asset? It's trash.
Wow, words are interesting. It's what we call it. If we call it trash, we call it garbage, then it is. If we call it a resource, that it is, then it is. So we take this organic matter, our food scraps, our paper, which we call garbage, and turn it into black gold. The worms are the original alchemists, so they transform that material into something usable so we can grow more nutrient-rich food. So trash to me is something. Nature doesn't make garbage. We're the garbage makers. So we take the resources from nature and then we convert it into something that may not be usable, like plastic and stuff is useful for one time, but going forward, it's going to be the death of us. So when we take this organic matter and turn it into soil, now it's something very valuable.
Katia, I've got lots of questions because I'm I am growing vegetables on my decks. In my,
So you've got like an apartment.
I'm in a flat, yes, with
in
two
Toulouse,
decks, one facing east, the other one facing west. So it's not the best exposure, but in any case, I'm very conscious about the organic matter that I would call a resource, and I'm deeply convinced about this. And of course, I did try. Actually, I did try 3 times to grow worms and feed them with that matter. But for some reason, there's something I must be doing wrong. I can't get the point between humidity. Is it a question of temperature? Do we already have too high temperature down in Toulouse so that they don't feel comfortable? Or I'm just wondering, how you get that to work, because it should be actually pretty simple. But the reality has been for me 3 subsequent absolute disaster.
So Kathy, for somebody like Bertrand, who's like, if we've got an apartment, and we want to grow worms, where do we start?
Wonderful. So there are 3 key elements to successful vermicomposting: temperature, moisture, and airflow. Temperature, I'm bilingual, so 16 to 28 Celsius or 60 to 80 Fahrenheit for the international audience. Moisture is about 70%, 70 to 75% humidity. You don't need a moisture gauge. You can feel that it's moist. If it's dry, you need to add more water. And airflow, you need to have holes in your bin. So any container will do. A Rubbermaid tote or any kind of plastic container is.
Can you buy them, Kathy?
Yes, there are systems to purchase,
right.
And they're wonderful, but it's not the system that makes it work. You still need to create the right environment.
Okay.
So the worms require a carbon-nitrogen mix, just like outdoor composting. The carbon is shredded paper, leaves, straw, cardboard, drink trays. Any combination of these products can be used for your bedding. And the nitrogen, or the food source, is your scraps from the kitchen. Banana peels, coffee, tea, cooked pasta and rice can go in.
But the key thing is that it's not like tomato sauce and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly. So what stays out of your worm bin? No meat, no dairy, no sauce, no condiments, no salt, anything, no grease, anything that might cause trouble for the worms. The worms breathe through their skin. So you want to make sure, just like frogs, you want to make sure that the environment is optimum for them. You need to balance the acidity in the bedding, the pH, with eggshells or calcium carbonate. If people are vegan and they don't eat eggs, that's okay. You can actually use crushed up Tums or Rolaids because it's an antacid. So you're actually just.
What did you say?
Rums, Tums or Rolaids that you take if you have acid reflux.
Oh, okay.
It's the
bicarbonate soda type.
Yes, correct. So using eggshells is a wonderful thing. yeah, so you can just add your crushed eggshells, and that will help to balance the pH. Yeah, so Bertrand, to answer your question, I think it can be a whole combination of things. When things go wrong, they go wrong very quickly. Action is required very, you know, 3 times.
Yes.
So, what kind of worm did you have?
I mean the red ones, you know, the in French we call it the lombrics, but I think it's just earthworms, basically. You know,
That could have been your challenge. So there's thousands of types of worms. Only 4 have been identified as optimum for vermicomposting. We're
but
looking for surface dwellers.
these were.
Oh, they were. Okay.
I
Where'd
don't
you get
know.
them from? So where'd you get worms from? A pet shop or something?
I bought them actually from a farm.
Right.
And maybe that's part of the issue. It's just you know, but I get the point. You know, temperature is certainly one of the challenges. Humidity, I got that all the time, that it needs to be, you know, quite humid, 70-75%. Okay, airflow, I think there was airflow, but maybe not so much. But then the pH is probably something that actually it's almost a use case for IoT. You know, with a bunch of sensors
Internet of Things.
and then
Yes, thank you.
try to monitor your farm, you know, with the right sensors.
I can just see the worms typing away on their computers. Yes.
I think that's the problem, is that we try to micromanage everything. And if we look to nature, nobody's looking after the worms in the wild. They will just come, and if people dispose of garbage in the forest, it's going to be covered in a couple of years. That will be covered. The worms will take over and they'll bury that waste.
Yeah.
So
bad.
Kathy, why is worm compost considered superior to traditional compost?
Compost is great. It's a fine thing. Worm compost is finer. It's more processed by nature, although usually processing is not the best thing. With what the worms do is they turn the material into a time-release capsule. So each little casting or worm poo, yes,
it's worm poo, isn't it?
It's worm poo.
Worm poo, yes.
It is. The casting is the fancy word for worm poo.
Yeah.
And so each little casting or worm poo is like a time release capsule. The earth will take from it as it needs it. You can't add too much, but it's super rich, so you don't want to waste it, like just throwing it, on your garden. You want to use it targeted. The worms will bind up any heavy metals. So if there's heavy metals in your material that you're adding in, anything toxic, the worms will weed that out, and it doesn't get into the final product. They really are remarkable creatures. And in India, they had a project where there was a silk factory that they had contaminated the soil around with their disposing of the wastewater, and they added worms in there, and the worms were able to clean up that soil, which was, wow, it's amazing. You wouldn't want to take those worms and add them, you wouldn't want them to feed them to chickens then, or put them up the food chain. They would be working to do the composting.
And you mentioned this can be done indoors?
Yes. How do you like me now? Worms in the house. Who doesn't want that? That's the challenge of a worm business. People don't buy what they need. They buy what they want. And they don't necessarily, they don't necessarily want worms in the house. This is a beautiful solution for anywhere. So in Canada, in the winter, we can't compost outside. Not that you can't, just everything's frozen, so it slows right down. It's too cold, right? It's something still happening. It just takes a lot longer. In California or Texas, too hot in the summer, so the worms will cook. So I'm not sure in Toulouse how warm it is, but if we're doing it inside, if we're comfortable, the worms are comfortable. It doesn't have to be an exact temperature. It's the change that the worms don't like. So we'll say Texas. in the day it might be too hot, and then maybe it cools down at night. I'm not sure. Right. So if we're inside, even if you have your air conditioning in it, then you have it kind of coolish, that will be fine because it's always going to be uniform temperature.
And do you also collect the tea?
Yeah. So if you want to collect the compost tea, not for drinking, but for your plants as liquid fertilizer, just so people aren't like, oh, I'll make my own tea. No, don't drink it. Although maybe you grow hair, Tim, I don't know.
I'm going to look into it.
Yeah, we've got British audience, so English audience even.
This might be a challenge in a Rubbermaid container. If you just have a single unit collecting the tea, because I do advocate for managing your moisture on the way in so it doesn't get too wet. If you have a system, there's tower composters, and they function pretty similar, where you have a couple of trays and there's holes in the bottom of each tray. Start with one tray, add the next tray on top, and the worms migrate up. There's generally a base in the bottom that will collect the excess moisture and a tap in the bottom. And that's a beautiful thing, with caution. So if that liquid, if it smells bad, it's become anaerobic. Anaerobic means it's not good or bad. It's just that it's different bacteria. Those are the bacteria that don't require oxygen. So the smelly buggers. Your plants always require aerobic bacteria. You don't want to add any of those anaerobic microbes into your soil, because once they're there, they're always present.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
you alluded to odor. What are the common misconceptions about indoor composting, odor and such?
Thank you. Yeah, some of the objections. Because we're adding in rotting food, the idea is, oh my gosh, it's my kitchen's going to smell like rotting food because I'm adding rotting food in. Not true. The worms eat the odor. So once they get established, it's such a quick system that the worms, there's no time for it to get smelly. You're adding your scraps in and the worms get right to it. They eat about half their weight per day in food scraps. So for easy math, I'll use a pound of worms. If you had a pound of worms, you would be adding about half a pound of food scraps per day, 3 to 4 pounds per week. And they convert the material. They reduce the volume by about 80%. So although you're adding in quite a bit of material, they're reducing it quite a bit. And then you get this black gold. So that's one of the objections, is the odor. If your bin smells, action is required because the worms breathe oxygen. It's like this was made to be done inside. We breathe oxygen, the worms breathe oxygen. If it smells bad, it's now converted to gas or methane, and we can't breathe gas, and neither can the worms.
Do you need to shred? You need to shred your organic matter. So does it need to be shred so that they actually eat it faster, or do you have any recommendation on that? I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
That's quite a tricky question.
No, it's beautiful. It's perfect. Yes. Yes, you need to shred up your material. The paper, you can shred it by hand or through a paper shredder. That's fine. Imagine an apple. You had an apple and you added the whole apple in with the peel unbroken. The worms can't get to it. They don't have eyes, but if they did, they'd be like, oh, now we have to wait for our bug friends to break that down. The smaller the scraps, the faster it breaks down. The more exposed surface, the faster it breaks down, the more the worms can eat. So,
but if you've got like a banana skin, you can, or a grapefruit, or half a grapefruit, as in, you've cut it in half. You can put that in, can you? Or do you need to cut the grapefruit up?
Thank you for grapefruit. I do suggest leaving out citrus.
Okay, right.
So lemons, orange, limes, grapefruit, leave those out. There is a toxic element in the peel for worms.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of school workshops, so I definitely suggest that they leave citrus out altogether, because imagine one day everybody could bring an orange. And now the worms are just getting orange, and it's too acidic. There's this toxic element. They're going to leave anything that isn't for them. The students will often ask, oh, if I put in an elastic band, will they eat it? No, they're just going to go around it, but it will be left there forever.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think it's the
you
same for
mentioned,
garlic and onion, right?
Yeah, so garlic and onion, they kind of don't break down. You can add them in, but they don't really add any benefit. They're just that papery subject. So I actually just throw those out with the leaves. I just put them outside.
I can't believe a French person throwing out garlic.
Yeah. That's exactly where you can tell that I'm not a native from the southwest of France.
Kathy,
Sorry.
I think you mentioned a pound of worms, a half pound of organic matter each day. I apologize if I got my numbers wrong, but what do you expect is the typical amount of waste a household produces each day? And I suppose that depends on the size of the household. So in that case, what would a typical person produce each day?
Perfect.
My real question is this. I have 7 people living under my roof. How many pounds of worms do I need?
Perfect. So it's not a per person ratio. It's lifestyle. Vegetarian and vegan are going to produce more scraps than meat and potatoes. If you're preparing your food from scratch, you're producing more than if you buy packaged goods or you eat in restaurants mostly. So those are the questions that I ask when people say, "Oh, we're 5 people in our house. How many worms?" If people really want to know how many worms they need, I suggest weighing their waste for a week or a couple of weeks in a bucket, all the scraps that can be fed to the worms, leaving out meat and all the things that don't go in, and see how much you produce in a couple of weeks. Then that will give you an average and you'll have a better idea. But when I was doing research before I started my business, I learned that the average Canadian family produces a ton of organic waste in a year, and that a pound of worms and their descendants can transform a ton of organic waste in a year. So I said, wow, every family needs a pound of worms, and I'm just the one to put a pound of worms in every house. And not that a pound of worms can manage a ton of organic waste in one bin. They would need space to grow, so you would need to expand your system. And here's the math on that. Worms breed more than rabbits. So in 3 to 5 months, the worms are going to double in number. So if you start with a pound, you'll have 2 pounds, and then you'll have 4 pounds, and so on and so on. Not in one little bin. The worms, at a certain point, you'll have a beautiful biomass of worms, and you'll be adding your scraps, and wow, I have so many worms. At that point, you can either take some out and start another bin. So those worms will reproduce, and then the new worms will get established in the next system. Or you can leave them and they'll work it out for themselves. The adults start dying off to make room for the babies. And this is such an incredible lesson. It's a great education for everybody. It's so fascinating watching the worms. It's not something that we think about until you have somebody like me on your show. And I wasn't always a worm lover. It was just that I saw this big problem, and I was introduced to vermicomposting when I bought my house in 93. It was a disaster because I had a fruit fly explosion, and that's a second objection. I'll talk about that in a moment. So when I started my first introduction to worms, I was throwing the food, and I didn't want worms in the house. I wanted the black gold that they create. As an avid gardener, I knew the value of the compost. I didn't want to do the process, and that's where most people are. They want the end product, but they don't want to do the work. So let me talk about the fruit flies, since I brought that up, and people are like, yeah, I don't want fruit flies. When people say to me, I don't want to have fruit flies in my house, I ask them, have you ever had fruit flies? Yes, most have. Have you ever had a worm bin? No, except Bertrand. No. Okay, good. So you know that the fruit flies don't come from the worm bin if you've never had one in your house. They come from the fruit. They're fruit flies. So they're pretty much on all the fruit peels. We wash the apples. We wash the pears. We wash most fruit before we eat it. The bananas, we do not. We peel the banana and we eat the banana. So the fruit flies are still on the banana peel. What I suggest people do is give anything they don't generally wash before adding it into the worm bin. Give it a quick rinse. That will wash off the peels, and then chopping it up. So the banana peel, to answer your earlier comment, Tim, about banana peels, you can add the banana peel right in. And I joke with the students that the worms will use it as a slide. They'll sliding down the banana peel. It will decompose pretty quickly, and they can get to that. Other stuff you really want to chop up, like cabbage. Cabbage is something that lasts forever. It's going to be there several rounds. So the things that you're adding in, it will depend on how fast it breaks down. Lettuce will break down much quicker than cabbage. Tomatoes are pretty juicy, so they break down pretty quick. Watermelon, pretty juicy. So depending what you're adding in is how fast it will break down.
So I have this worm bin in my house, and it's producing black gold. How do I get black gold from my worm bin to my garden without having black gold all over my house?
Good. That's a great question. You need to harvest. So once the worms have converted all the material, then you would, if you're comfortable with the worms and you don't have a system, you're just using a single unit. The easiest way is to dump it out on a plastic sheet outside on a sunny day, put it in small round piles. The worms are photosensitive or afraid of the light, so they're going to go down in the piles. That's why the smaller the pile, the faster the harvest. If you have a big mountain, you just dump it out and just leave it. They're going to go just a little bit in, and then you're going to scrape off, and it's going to take a long time for you to separate. So having the small piles, you scoop off the top and the sides of each pile. The worms are continue making their way down. Eventually, you'll have a little ball of worms in each pile. You've set up your worm bin, your new bedding, ahead of time, because you don't want to stress the worms too much. Then you're going to take those worms, add them into your new bedding, and then you'll have your black gold. You take that and use that in your gardens. If you've got existing plants, you can spread it around the stem, gently work it in so it's not exposed. It'll just dry out. And as you water or as it rains, the nutrients are released and accessible to the roots. It's the castings or the compost and the roots have this symbiotic relationship, and they create an immune system in the soil. So creating this immunity, the pathogens are always present, but they can't get there if the soil is healthy. They can't get there and eat the roots because they're being, battled off with the good. And I use an analogy for the students. If we have a healthy immune system, we're strong, we're doing the good things, we're healthy, we're drinking our water, good thoughts, all the good things, and we have a strong immune system, somebody next to us might be sick and we won't get it because our immune system is so strong. Same in the soil. The pathogens are present, but they can't get there.
And you said that there was you could get one like a layered one. So if you explain to me that, and is that harvesting different then?
Oh, yes. If you have a system, the harvesting is done for you. That's one of the beautiful benefits is you don't have to worry about moisture. It's collected and it self-harvests. So you have your one tray. When that tray is full, you add the next tray on top with your fresh bedding, and you start adding your food in the next tray. The worms are following the food. Some will go right away, like, yay, new adventure, and they go upstairs. Some will stay and finish what's there. And so once the worms have finished downstairs, then they all make their way upstairs. You got to make sure that there's contact because they can't jump. They just kind of squirm on up. And then you're left with the black gold. So the system, for those that don't want to be hands-on with the worms, a system is ideal.
Yes.
Because you're just adding your food in. You don't have to touch the worms. You don't have to even see them, because when you open the lid, they don't like the light. They go away from the light. Bury your scraps in the bedding. Make sure it's covered so you don't get the fruit flies. And you keep on adding the paper, adding your food. you just keep going. And when I started my business, I was contacted by a woman who had been doing worm composting for 10 years. And she said, it's becoming a bit much for me. Do you want the bin? And I didn't, yeah, I said yes. I didn't necessarily want the bin. I wanted to meet this woman. She had 10 years experience. So she said, okay. I said yes. So she said, okay, let me just get the soil and I'll get in touch. Okay. 2 weeks later, she contacted me and said, okay, I've emptied the bin. You can come and get it. She said, but the worms died. Like there was no worms. I just had the soil. So I said, okay. She said, do you still want the bin? I didn't care about the bin. I wanted to meet this lady. When I arrived at her house, she was in a wheelchair. She was probably in her late 70s, early 80s. And I was amazed. I was like, wow. I didn't say this, but I thought, wow, look at you in a wheelchair. You have your own challenges, and yet you care about the planet enough to have worms. And so I said, when was the last time you harvested? She didn't have a system. She got a system in the 80s. Toronto was giving out composters. You could have a composter or you could get a worm bin. The government was giving out worm bins. What? Wow. How advanced. Not anymore. They don't even talk about composting anymore. Can you imagine? We've gone back. Yeah, so she got this bin and she said, I'd never harvested. In 10 years, she never harvested her bin once. She would keep adding, right? The worms are reducing the volume. So she would add the food on the bedding on top. The worms would convert it. She would take out what she needed. Remember, she was in a wheelchair. So she would take out what she needed for her garden from the compost, use it. And so I was amazed. So when people say, how often do I have to harvest? Well, never, apparently. You never have to, as long as you keep on adding the scraps on top and you take out the compost because it would fill up eventually. Yeah, so I was really quite astounded by this woman.
Can businesses integrate vermicomposting into their waste management practices?
Sure can. And again, back to my beginning. When I was researching my business, I found a very large system at Metro Hall, which is a government building in Toronto. They had a very large worm bin, and it was high tech. It was well, at the time, $150,000 system, probably $1 million system today. It was fully automated. It would manage 400 pounds of waste per day. It took all of the paper towels from this 30-story building, all the coffee grounds, all the cafeteria waste, and all the lunchroom scraps. So they had a system where in the bathrooms, they had a separate container for just the paper towels. And so that everybody was on board of what was happening here. It had a mister that would keep it moist. There was a rake that would rake across, and the castings fell out of the bottom. And they would, twice a year, they had environmental days. So they would give the compost to the staff just to let them know, hey, here's where your banana peels from your lunch went. Go put this on your gardens. So beautiful. And I went, so this system was the size of a parking space. Maybe two parking spaces. And that's where it was, in the underground garage of this 30-story government building. And I was so impressed. It was actually managed by a woman named Robin. And I thought that was funny. Robin was watching the worms. And she gave us a private tour of the system. Usually it was for groups, but because we were starting a worm business, she allowed my husband and I to go and have a look. Several years later, so I met the woman, the environmental manager for that building. Well, several years, a couple years later, I gave her my card. A couple years later, that the Toronto introduced an organic collection program called the Green Bin, and they said we don't need this system anymore. She got in touch with me all in a panic. She said the government, they want to just throw this. Sorry, Michigan. They wanted to send the whole system to Michigan. Like, okay, we don't need this anymore. We've got the Green Bin. So the system is redundant. And I was like, no, it isn't. Look at all the condos around. This is a great museum piece. So she said, I've got in touch with organizations, universities. Everybody has to have meetings, right? They got to decide, oh, we got to have board meetings. This is a good idea. Can we get it? I said, I'm a board of one. I want it. Yes, I'll come and get it. So I didn't get the system. It was there for too long, but I got the grinder. I got, I don't know how much compost I got. I got all of the equipment, and in fact needed to do 2 trips and threw out the alignment in my friend's truck. It almost cost me more money to collect that. I was shocked that they were willing to, well, and they did in fact just close the system because they figured it wasn't needed anymore. But imagine doing this on site rather than trucking the material away.
So Kathy, all this sounds so, I would say, so obvious that this is something we should be expanding rather than, walking away from. So what are the obstacles from your perspective to really get that at scale? Because that sounds like, really, to be honest, I didn't realize that there was a business use case, that there were business use cases, or at least applications for business of that approach. So, what are the obstacles, and what are you? I suspect you've got a few ideas on how to overcome them.
The worms are the big obstacle, and and I have a psych degree, so I'm fascinated by people and why they do what they do. And what I've learned from exhibiting is people were traumatized as children in the schoolyard by worms. After a rainy day, or a sibling chased them around, or maybe a fishing incident with the green goo coming out of the worm, something might have happened. So if you were traumatized as a child, you're not looking to that as an adult as a solution. Mm-hmm. And I think that we just are looking for high-tech solutions. We're looking for something that is, well, although the system was fully automated and mechanized, we're really looking for high-tech, and the worms are low-tech. They're very simple. You really don't need anything other than a container and somebody to manage them. Mm-hmm. That's the other box in your job description. There were, about the business course model. For 15 years, a hospital in Lindsay, Ontario had they had 30 bins. It wasn't automated at all. It was the housekeeping person's job to manage the worms. And he just got in touch with me. They just closed the system because they got a new COO, and she said the worms got to go. It depends. So it's what is the biggest obstacle? It's the person in charge. That's the biggest obstacle. And their belief about worms, or their fear of worms, or whatever they think about worms. Worm is a bad word. So worms have energy, and worm seems to be like parasites are worms, computer viruses are worms. Worm is just like an earworm is a bad thing. Can of worms, now you've opened a can of worms. I always go, yay, can of worms. But I know it's usually, then I go, I know it's a bad thing, sorry. So,
we need a better PR agent.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's it. We get all hung up on what we know or what we think we know. And yeah, it's really, I don't know what, you said I have an idea. I really don't. 20 years in, and I still am not sure how to get past the barrier of the
It's about getting over our fears then.
It is.
Mainly. Okay. Well,
that's why I do school workshops. That's why I start with the kids. That's why I do the school workshops. Over 75,000 students have seen my presentation, and educating the kids. I've had the privilege, being in business for 22 years, of meeting students, former students that I went to their grade 3 class, and now they've graduated from university. And they meet me at events, and they'll come up and they'll say, Kathy, you came into my grade 3 class because we had worms in the class, or because of me, whatever they say. I went to university for environmental studies, and now I'm an environmental lawyer. Wow. Like, that's a huge impact. We never know. Wow. We're making an impact every day. Whenever we do something, we're making an impact. we don't always have the privilege of knowing.
What are some common mistakes beginners make with vermicomposting?
I've got a
Bertrand?
whole list.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me direct that somewhere else.
Some of the things, when people hear that they eat half their weight, they throw in the food. They keep on throwing in the food without looking at the system. So yes, they do eat half their weight per day, and they need to get established first. So you need to make sure that all the microbes are working. The worms are the top predator in the worm bin. So there's springtails and mites and all kinds of microbes that are doing the work. They're doing the heavy lifting. The worms are just the cleanup crew. So we're adding the microbes into our system with the soil, and just a little bit of soil. So a few things that people do, because they're worms, they often think that they need to add a lot of soil in. So sometimes people will add, like when I go and do inspections on their whole bin is just full of soil. So there's nothing else in there. The worms are the soil makers. So we only need like a scoop of soil, like a cup of soil or a couple of cups of soil. That's all we add. And it needs to be not potting soil, not soil that's in a bag, because if it's in a bag, it's sterilized and the microbes have been destroyed. You want soil from outside, from nature, somewhere that no chemicals have been applied. So that's one thing. Sometimes there's either too much soil or no soil. The incorrect soil, just potting soil that's been sterilized, so there's no bugs. Too much food, not enough food, maybe no, there's many things that can go wrong. But once you get it, it's magic. It really is like an incredible, it's nature's magic show where they're converting this stuff, and it goes so quick. Once your worms are established and everything's happening, you add your stuff in there and wow. And I've grown the most amazing things, I had some dates and they had the pits in them. And one day I just stuffed it in my bin. I wonder, who knows? And I was at an event. I don't even know how much time it was, months later. And I was showing somebody, oh, here's what the worms. So you start like this. And I had a bin with the shredded paper. And then you end like this, and showing them the finished one that had the worms in it. When I pulled back the bedding, I found this little thing growing. I said, wow, what's this? And I pulled it. I scared the people away because I was like, wow, what is this? Oh, no. And they were like, oh, she's cuckoo. So it was my date pit had started to, I was growing a palm tree in my worm bin. Wow. I was shocked. I was amazed. Could I grow a palm tree in Canada? Probably not, not yet. But same will happen with avocado pits, mango pits will start to germinate. So it's incredible when you have nutrient-rich soil, magic happens. Nothing to be done. I'm not a great gardener. I'm a soil maker. So my soil, and that's the key to being a great gardener, is to have great soil. Start with the foundation, good soil. The soil will look after the plants, nothing to be done. And adding compost is the answer to any issue with your soil. If your soil is too acidic, add compost. If your soil is too alkaline, add compost. It's the great mitigator. It fixes everything.
Do pets and indoor bins go together?
They do. The bin has a lid on it, so your cat can sit on top of the worm bin and be the worm minder.
And dogs.
And dogs, yes. Dogs can sit on there too. And I used to think that the lid was a psychological barrier because the worms can get out of any hole. They don't have bones. So if the conditions are not right in the bin, they're going to crawl out of the bin. And don't freak out anybody because they're not going to get out if you're treating them right. They're eating half their weight. They don't have eyes. No point in going sightseeing. They can't see. So if they crawl out of your bin, it's that conditions are like too acidic, too wet, too dry. Something is happening in the bin. So for the lid, I used to think, yeah, you don't really need a lid because they can get out of any hole. But the lid keeps the moisture in. It keeps it dark. The worms like it dark. So if you have a lid on your bin, you can keep your bin anywhere. And for the bin, you want to have a dark bin. You don't want to have a bin that has like an opaque bin. You know, like an ant farm. Teachers will ask me, can I just have this in a fish tank? And so the students can watch. Yes, you can, but the worms will be in the center. You won't be able to watch them unless you have it covered, like you have maybe a curtain on it or something, and then you pull the curtain aside, then they'll be able to watch for a little bit.
So what do you think, Bertrand? You're going to do it? You're going to try for a fourth time?
Exactly. That's I'm just I can't I can't accept the fact that this is not working. So so there's definitely temperature is an issue, but I'll give it another try, Katie. I think you convinced me to go for one more.
I have a worm hotline, so you can just call me or send me a note.
I'll definitely give you a call.
0800 worm.
And I can confirm everything that Katie said. They are not going. I had the worms inside. I had them outside. They are not going anywhere. So there's nothing to be scared of. That's clear.
And the composting
I like the
worms,
idea about rinsing the fruits that we don't usually rinse, or so that the peelings are clean from the fruit flies. That's also another very good tip.
And Rob, you asked about things that can go wrong with the chemicals that we're applying to our crops today. If people are eating organic, they're less likely to have this challenge. But with conventional crops, there still may be the residue from the pesticide on the peels. And today, the chemicals that we're using are very resilient. They don't wash off in the rain. They're not designed to wash off. So that means they don't wash off when we wash them just with water. Like people think, oh, I'm washing my potatoes or whatever. If you're just washing it with water, potatoes grow into the ground, so I don't know why I said potatoes. But you know what I mean? So sometimes people will call me and they'll say, my worms have been doing great and something just happened. They just all died. So then I walk them back. What was the last thing you added in? Okay, before that. And I try and figure out I feel like a detective and trying to figure out, I really want to know and I want to help people because there is a reason something did happen. And when things happen, they go fast because the worms are sentient creatures. They're just in this environment. And I believe that the worms are like the canary in the coal mine. When we have no more worms, we're doomed because they're the soil makers. And not to be a doomsday person, but I think that this is a solution and we need to all be looking after our food waste. It's something we can all do. We all eat. So it's really something we can all do. Grow a little bit of food because when you grow your own food, you're not wasting it. Bertrand, I'm here for you.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Yeah.
Now, Kathy, when you introduced yourself, you mentioned something about laughter and humor as well. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I'm also a laughter yoga teacher, and yoga.
I want to make sure I heard that right. A laughter yoga teacher?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us all about that.
So it's not doing yoga and laughing. It's laughing as an exercise. It's a cardiovascular workout. When we're laughing, we're totally present. We're secreting the love drugs, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Laughter is the opposite of stress. So we can't be laughing and stressed at the same moment. And why I started laughter in 2012, 10 years into my worm mission, one more person said, ew, worms in the house. I'd heard it hundreds of times before, but I wasn't listening. I was like, no, this is important. You need this. But people don't buy what they need. So in 2012, I questioned everything. I felt it. I heard it. I was like, wow, how am I going to do this? This is too hard. And the very next day I was introduced to laughter yoga, and it changed my life. It allowed me not to take personal when people said, ooh, worms in the house. They weren't saying, ooh, Kathy, you're gross. They might have been, but it was like more what you're offering, I'm not interested in. And it's a huge distinction for anybody that's in business thinking, oh my gosh, why don't people want what I have? Maybe it's maybe it's what you have and not you. And so now I've been laughing since 2012, really laughing since 2020 when the world shut down. And I really want people to care about the planet, but when you're in a mental crisis, it's not possible. So my goal now is to help people get out of stress so they can get worms and care about the planet. Thank you for asking about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're taking a different set of waste and converting that, all the stress and so on. And
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm transforming people's stress into joy. And it's just an energy. It's a frequency. That's it. When we're feeling sad, anxious, depressed, frustrated, any of those, we're vibrating at a low level. So this helps us it frees us. And English is so interesting. I'm going to say a couple of sentences and I'll break it down. So no laughter, no problem. No laughter, no problem. So N-O laughter, K-N-O-W problem. K-N-O-W laughter, N-O problem. And it's not, so no laughter, like if we're not laughing, we gotta talk about our problem. If we no laughter, we're laughing, it frees us up because when we're stressed, we're not breathing properly. Our brain is not getting oxygen. So ever lost your keys and you're flapping around? I gotta go, I can't find my keys. Your keys are right there, but your brain is literally being deprived of oxygen. So when we're laughing, our brain is oxygenated and we can come up with more solutions because we're not stressed. We're freed. We're freed up and solutions can pour in. And back to the corporation, laughter is needed in corporate today. It's great for team building. People are stressed. They don't want to be in the office, or they do, or and we've been isolated. We were isolated for a long time. And when we're isolated, that's when fear comes in. We just have the voice in our head that confirms that we're not enough. So thank you. The laughter just helps us to just be present so we can come up with better ideas.
I definitely buy this. No.
Kathy, let's tie this all together. If there's one idea you want people walking away from today, how would you summarize that? What do you want us to think about? What do you want us to know? What do you want us to do?
Thank you. I want people to live their life for them. I want them to be themselves. We're living with somebody else's guidebook. Our parents wanted us to do something, or other people have all these societal, the structure and this rigid, I don't know what it is. And it's really hard living by somebody else's rules because it might not be what we want to do. We have one life to live. I think that we need to start playing a lead role in our own life instead of, a supporting role. I want people to just be more joyful. So one way is I have a free Tuesday Laughter Club online every Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 30 minutes of super fun self-care. I incorporate tapping, Qigong, brain gym, just to help people get out of stress and into joy. There's no pressure. Come, experience the magic. I don't follow up. If you sign up and don't come, I don't chase you. I just want people to live more authentically and more joyfully. It's our birthright. I believe it's our birthright to be in joy. When we're resisting, that's fine, but that maybe not right now, that thing. Maybe just put that over there for now and see what is for you right now.
Kathy, this has been great. Where can people learn more about you? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, if they want to know more about the worms, my website is kathyscomposters.com, Kathy with a C. And if they want to know about the laughter, it's kathysclub.com, Kathy with a C. And to register for the club, it's just at the top of my laughter page.
Fantastic. We now have a newsletter. Don't miss an episode. Get show highlights, beyond the show insights, and reminders of upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live/newsletter. On behalf of the panelists, to our guest, to our audience, thank you all for being a part of this week's episode, and we'll see you next time on the Digital Download.
Thanks,
Bye all.
Kathy.